So this virus has got everyone sort of worried, and it means I've had to make a lot of my lectures online videos. I'm going to talk about a game I really like for a bit then. How's that sound? So, identity is a somewhat common theme in the Final Fantasy franchise. It's touched many of the stories and characters in an interesting way. In Final Fantasy VII, you have both Cloud and Sephiroth unraveling the truth behind themselves. Cloud having to come to terms with the fact that he never was a first-class soldier he wanted to be, but he can still save the day as himself. Sephiroth believing himself to be one of the Cetra and that his true mother is Jenova, a belief that causes him to almost end the world as revenge. However, it's Final Fantasy IX where the theme of identity, and most importantly, self-identification, has the strongest impact. Final Fantasy IX, released on the PlayStation in 2000, was a return, or rather send-up, to the classic Final Fantasy, both in terms of tone and setting. Both Final Fantasy VII and VIII took on a more contemporary or futuristic setting, 7 especially given the high-tech city of Midgar. 9, on the other hand, returned to the more medieval steampunk aesthetic, more in line with Final Fantasy 3 or 4, right down to Yoshitake Amano taking the lead with designs rather than Tetsuya Nomura. Kingdoms and castles are a major set piece throughout the game, with lead characters even taking the forms of knights, queens, princesses, and king regents. The story follows Zidane Tribal, an unusual 16-year-old thief complete with a monkey's tail, who is part of a travelling theatre troupe named Tantalus. The troupe are hired to kidnap the young Princess Garnet of Alexandria during a performance of I Want to Be Your Canary. The plot twists, however, when Zidane finds the princess and she asks to be kidnapped. The troupe escapes Alexandria with Princess Garnet, Vivi, a young black mage, and Steiner, a devoted knight, in tow. Along the way, the crew meet new characters, but when war between kingdoms is declared, and a threat from another world rears its head, the team must try and save their world, while finding a place in it. While the theme of identity hits many of the characters in the story, such as Freya and her beloved Sir Frateley, who tragically does not remember their life together, or Kruger's disdain with his identity and decides to surpass it for himself, even if it means starting wars. However, the core 3 to look at are arguably its main protagonists. Zidane Tribal, Princess Garnet T. Alexandrios the 17th, I think, and Vivi the Black Mage. The plot of Final Fantasy IX is kickstarted by the kidnapping of Princess Garnet. However, the first thing we learn about her is her want to escape, to the point that she demands to be kidnapped by the theatre troupe, even playing along when it seems like they might be stopped when accidentally ending up on the stage during the performance. When they leave, the ship crashes in the forest and the party have to go find the princess. One of the first things Princess Garnet does when things quiet down is decide to give herself a new name, choosing to rename herself after the weapon Zidane is carrying, taking on the name Dagger. She requests that Steiner, the loyal protector and captain of the Knights of Pluto, stop referring to her as princess. With the exception of the end of the game and coming back to Alexandria in Disc 3, she sticks to the Dagger identity. While on the road, she makes an effort to change how she speaks, tries to define herself as something new. Through the course of the game, we learn a lot about her upbringing in the castle, her high caliber of education, the strict upbringing by her mother and father. When she describes it, particularly to Zidane, she speaks of it as though it's confinement. A particular notable scene is where Dagger and Steiner are travelling back to the castle, and when Steiner exclaims his happiness to be home, Dagger is utterly confused. It's only when he notes that Alexandria is larger than its castle walls we realise just how sheltered her life has been. Taking on the identity of Dagger could very well be seen as Garnet trying to figure out who she is outside of just being the Princess of Alexandria. She wants to find who she is outside of the well-spoken and highly educated royal. Taking on a new name to form a new identity is nothing new in fiction. An appropriate example would be The Matrix and its main character Neo. Neo starts off his life as Thomas Anderson. As the villain notes during the first act of the film, Thomas Anderson is a respected programmer for a software company. A good man who pays his taxes on time and helps out his landlady. But when he takes on the name Neo, he is freer in himself. He is the notorious hacker known throughout the internet for the work he does, most of which is heavily considered criminal activity. There is an active choice to do what he wants to do in his own time under the different name. This is compounded by the film's ending when the villain, Agent Smith, refers to him as Mr. Anderson, only for him to reply that his name is Neo. Dagger goes through a similar transformation here. She doesn't want to be defined by the Princess Garnet identity and the weight and responsibilities associated with it. She has never known a life, to her knowledge, that hasn't been governed by responsibility and obligation. Dagger, on the other hand, is brand new. No responsibility to the world and a life to call their own. Through the course of the game, however, the player and Garnet discover their true origins. It's revealed that when Garnet was very young, she was actually a member of the summoner tribe of Maiden Sari. She and her mother escape during the storm on a small boat and find themselves washed on the shore of Alexandria. Her mother didn't survive the trip, and the young Garnet, originally named Sarah, was taken in. The king and queen had just lost their daughter, Princess Garnet, and with the young girl Sarah resembling the princess heavily, they decide to raise Sarah as their own, removing the distinctive horn of the summoner tribe from her head and raising her as though nothing happened. Dagger learns this while on the road in her travel, and never does confront her mother with this reality. It becomes another part of her identity, a survivor of Maiden Sari and a summoner. After a final conversation with the dying Queen Bera, Dagger still sees her as her mother. The woman who did raise her, regardless of how things went towards the end, and the lie. Later, Dagger takes one last step to defining herself with her own identity, by cutting her hair with the same dagger she named herself for. By the end of the game, Dagger is now Queen Garnet of Alexandria, the daughter of Queen Bren, and the descendant of the Summoner tribe. She embraces every part of herself and in the final moment does what she chooses rather than what is expected, embracing Zidane in front of her kingdom. Being the main character of the game, the player would expect to learn a lot about Zidane. However, aside from a conversation in the second disc with Dagger, Zidane's background isn't revealed to us, or even to him, until the game's final act. Zidane's visual design does set him apart from the rest of his theatre troupe. He has a humanoid appearance, that of a teenager, but strangely he also has what appears to be a monkey's tail. It's not addressed until the latter half of the game, but it's always there. It provides some form of mystery surrounding Zidane. It doesn't seem to affect him, however. He's happy-go-lucky in nature, a stark contrast to the previous two protagonists, Squall Lionheart from Final Fantasy VIII and Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII. He makes a lot of jokes, he's a ladies' man, very bright and cheerful. Zidane is aware that he is not quite like everyone else, and has come to terms with that part of his life. Around Disc 2 of the game, Dagger and Zidane have a conversation in the middle of the night about home, largely speared on by events happening to Vivi. Dagger asks him what he defines as home, and Zidane goes on to tell him the story of how when he was 4, he washed up on the shores of Lindblum. His only memory was a blue light in the sky. He was found by the leader of Tantalus, Baku, and was raised as one of their own. One day, he decides to leave home and try to find his birth home. Eventually, he returns home to realize how stupid it was to look for somewhere when his only clue was a blue light. When he returns, Baku smacks him around for leaving without saying anything, but then smiles and makes him some food. He says to Dagger that that was the moment he saw the look on Baku's face, and felt the love from his brothers. He knew that was home. It's at this point that we know that Zidane is comfortable and knows who he is in life, even with the mystery of his tale. The final act of the game, however, is where Zidane's worldview comes crashing down. As the game draws to a close and the final plans are in motion, we learn about Kuja's plan and home planet, as well as his creator, Garland. As we come face to face with Garland, we learn that Kuja is, in fact, a manufactured being, meant to bring death and destruction to Gaia, the planet this game takes place on. However, Garland considers Kuja a fail, perhaps because he made Kuja as an adult, not having the ability to truly understand the depth of emotion needed for the job. So instead, he created a child, Zidane, calling him his angel of death. The beings created by Garland are largely husks, children with natural tails meant to one day house the souls of the people of Terra once they destroy Gaia and absorb its energy, saving their own world. Kuja and Zidane are considered more than their brethren, a species Garland names genomes. But the knowledge that Zidane was created to destroy the very planet he calls home destroys his sense of self. Throughout the game, whenever Vivi starts to worry about ideas of identity, Zidane is very quick to tell him how good it is to talk about how he feels, and not to keep it all inside. When Zidane's worldview comes crashing down, he ignores his own advice. He shuts himself away and pushes his friends aside. It's only as he's running away and his demons are about to win, his friends still come to his aid, starting with Steiner, who distrusted Zidane the least at the beginning of the game, and finally ending with Dagger. The news does shake him to his very core, but by the game's final battle, Zidane retains his nature and caring spirit. Kuja is defeated in battle, but once his friends are saved, Zidane decides to go back and rescue Kuja. They have a conversation about the hand life dealt them. As the conversation draws to a close, Kuja asks Zidane why he came to save him. Zidane's only answer mirrors what he's been saying to other people throughout the game. It's the right thing to do. With Dagger, you have someone trying to come into their own, but with Zidane, it's reaffirming who they are. Vivi is a stark contrast to both Dagger and Zidane. Vivi first appears as what looks like a young boy dressed as a traditional black mage, a reoccurring class in the Final Fantasy franchise. Vivi becomes swept up in the game's events when he sneaks into a showing of I Want to Be Your Canary, and ends up on the ship as it's escaping. As they end up in the small village where, while travelling, people seem to mistake Vivi for someone, or rather something else. Over time, we, just as Vivi does, begin to learn that black mages are manufactured. They are created as soulless weapons in the war by Kuja. Vivi is horrified by this, shaken to an intense degree. He questions his own thoughts and feelings. Vivi is someone that constantly doubts his power and free will. It's something that progresses through the game. On the second continent, Vivi finds that people do start to suddenly treat him differently, as though they know him and he's been to their village before. After questioning, the party discovers that there is a nearby village full of black mages. Vivi demands the party finds this village, which they do. Vivi isn't the only black mage to gain sentience, but he is clearly the youngest. Most refer to themselves only by number, but clearly have thoughts and feelings. Vivi is astounded to find this, and begins to start to feel like he is his own self. However, he finds a grave. After a conversation with one of the mages, he learns that they have a limited lifespan of only a single year. This is devastating news to Vivi, that does haunt him throughout the majority of the game. Vivi does show worry for the Black Mage village whenever the continent is in danger, becoming enraged when he learns that a number of the mages had chosen to go back to Kuja when they were promised an extension to their life, an obvious lie. The final time Vivi returns to the village, he does find just 2 mages left. They were waiting for a chocobo egg to hatch. Proof that these beings do indeed have a soul, for a soulless puppet wouldn't care about a baby chick being born, much less name it Bobby Corwin. During confrontations, Vivi is frequently referred to as a puppet and spoken to in the third person. As the game draws to a close, Vivi becomes a determined and strong-willed member of the party, doing what he can to defeat Garland and Kuja, and save his world. During the epilogue, it is hinted that Vivi did reach his expiration date, but his sons walk the streets of Alexandria and attend the new performance of I Want to Be Your Canary and the reunion of Zidane and Dagger. Final Fantasy IX is a masterwork in how it elevated storytelling through gameplay, revealing major character details to not only the character, but the player as well for maximum impact. While Final Fantasy as a whole does tell some amazing stories in relation to identity, it's IX that perhaps tells its story the most effective.